I was watering my garden when my phone buzzed. It was my daughter Sarah, but her voice sounded different today. "Mom, we're moving to California tomorrow. I sold your lake cabin and took the money. We need it for our new start. Sorry, but it's done." The line went dead before I could say a word. 53 years of being her mother, and she hung up on me like I was nothing. But I smiled as I put the phone down because Sarah had no idea what she'd just done. My name is Margaret Stone, and I'm 74 years old. For months, I thought I understood my daughter perfectly. My husband Frank had died 8 months ago from cancer. We'd fought that battle together for 2 years, holding hands through every doctor visit and treatment. The morning he passed, he'd made me promise to take care of our family recipes that had been passed down for generations. Those were his last words to me. Since then, Sarah had been visiting more often, helping with groceries, driving me to appointments. She'd smile and say, "Mom, you shouldn't live alone anymore. Let me help you with everything." I thought it was love, but now I see it was planning. The lake cabin had been our special place for 30 years. Frank built the dock with his own hands when Sarah was 12. Every summer, 3 generations would gather there for barbecues, fishing trips, and storytelling by the fire. Sarah would bring her children, and I'd teach them how to make Frank's famous pancakes. We'd stay up late looking at stars and sharing family stories. I never imagined Sarah would see it as just money in the bank. She knew that cabin held every happy memory we'd made as a family. Frank's fishing poles were still in the closet. His coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter exactly where he'd left it. When Sarah ended that call, I stood in my garden surrounded by the tomatoes Frank had planted before he got too sick to garden. For the first time since his funeral, I didn't feel sad. Something calm washed over me instead. I remembered something important that had slipped my mind during all the grief and confusion. 3 weeks before Frank died, he'd handed me a small metal box. "Maggie, put this in your bedroom closet. If something happens to me, open it when you're ready, but only when you feel strong enough." I tucked it away and forgotten about it completely. My neighbor called me in for lunch. Mrs. Chen had been bringing me soup every day since Frank passed. She looked at my face and asked if everything was okay. I told her Sarah had sold the cabin without asking me. Mrs. Chen shook her head and said, "Some children forget that parents have feelings too." After lunch, I walked slowly back to my house. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Excitement. I was thinking about that metal box, about Sarah's cold voice, and about her husband Tom who'd never liked me much. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, something that had been hard since Frank died. But today my legs felt strong. I opened my closet door and found the box exactly where I'd left it behind my winter coats. My hands shook as I carried it to the bed Frank and I had shared for 45 years. The afternoon light was streaming through our lace curtains, making patterns on the quilted bedspread. I took a deep breath and opened the box. Inside were papers, a small key, and a letter in Frank's careful handwriting that would change everything. The letter began, "My dear Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm watching you from somewhere beautiful. Please don't cry for too long. I need to tell you about something I kept secret because I wanted to protect you from worry. Remember how I always said I was just a simple factory worker? Well, I was also something else. I bought stocks every month for 40 years. I bought land when nobody wanted it. I saved every penny we didn't need for daily life." My heart was beating fast as I read on. There were bank papers showing accounts I'd never heard of. According to Frank's papers, we owned much more than I ever imagined. There was the cabin Sarah had sold, but also a small apartment building downtown, some farmland outside the city, and bank accounts with numbers that seemed impossible. Frank had been buying property quietly for decades, always putting everything in both our names. The letter explained that he'd kept it secret because he didn't want Sarah to treat us differently if she knew about the money. "I wanted her to love us for who we are," he wrote, "not for what we have." That night I couldn't sleep, but not from sadness like usual. I walked through our small house, touching things that suddenly meant more to me. Frank's reading glasses, his favorite coffee cup, The photo of Sarah graduating from college. I looked at that picture for a long time. When did my sweet little girl become someone who would steal from her own mother? Frank's letter had more instructions. He'd hidden a key to a storage unit where he'd kept important papers about all our property. He'd also left me the name of a lawyer who knew about everything. The next morning Sarah called again. Her voice was sweeter now, like honey poured over broken glass. "Mom, how are you feeling? I know yesterday was hard, but Tom and I deposited some money in your account. It's your share from the cabin sale. We kept most of it because, let's face it, you don't need much at your age. We left you enough to live simply for a few years. My share of my own property. How generous. When do you leave?" asked, keeping my voice steady. "This afternoon. Our truck's already packed. Don't worry about us, Mom." After she hung up, I called the lawyer Frank had mentioned. Mr. Williams remembered Frank well and agreed to see me that same day. I dressed in my best blue dress, the one Frank always said made my eyes sparkle. When I looked in my bedroom mirror, I saw someone I hadn't seen in months. A woman with purpose. Mr. Williams' office was in an old brick building downtown. He greeted me with kind eyes and a warm handshake. When I showed him Frank's letter and the papers from the box, his expression changed completely. "Mrs. Stone," Mr. Williams said slowly, "your husband was a very smart man. These properties are worth considerable money. The apartment building alone generates enough rent to support you comfortably forever." He explained that the cabin sale was illegal because Sarah had no right to sell property that wasn't hers. "We can reverse this sale immediately and pursue charges if you want." But I had a different idea forming in my mind. "Mr. Williams, I want to get my cabin back, but I want to do it quietly. Can you make sure Sarah doesn't know I'm behind it?" Mr. Williams nodded with understanding. "Certainly. It will take a few weeks, but we can handle everything discreetly." I also asked him to look into Tom's finances. Something told me Sarah's husband wasn't the successful businessman he pretended to be. "I want to know exactly what they're running from," I said. As I left his office, I felt like I was carrying a wonderful secret. That afternoon, I watched from my window as Sarah and Tom loaded their beat-up truck with suitcases and boxes. They looked excited, like teenagers planning an adventure with stolen money. Over the next few weeks, I lived two different lives. During the day, I was the sad old widow everyone pitied. Neighbors brought me casseroles and offered to help with groceries. Mrs. Chen would sit with me and we'd talk about how ungrateful children could be sometimes. But in the evenings, I was busy learning about Frank's investments and working with Mr. Williams to get my property back. I discovered that Tom had gambling debts and had been borrowing money from dangerous people. That's why they needed to leave town so quickly. Mr. Williams called with good news. "Mrs. Stone, we've recovered your cabin." The buyers were very understanding when we explained the situation. They got their money back and found another property. He also had information about Tom's debts. "Your daughter's husband owes over $50,000 to some very impatient creditors. They've been looking for him." I asked Mr. Williams to do one more thing. "I want you to buy the house they're renting in California, but don't let them know I'm the owner." It was time for Sarah to learn an important lesson about family and respect. For 2 months, I heard nothing from Sarah. Not a phone call, not a letter, nothing. She'd taken what she thought was my life savings and disappeared without caring if I was eating or taking my medicine. But Mr. Williams kept me updated on their situation. Tom had lost job after job because his creditors kept finding him. Sarah was working double shifts at a diner trying to pay bills with money she'd stolen from me. The fairy tale life in California wasn't turning out as planned. Meanwhile, I was learning to manage my real wealth and making plans. I decided to visit the cabin for the first time since getting it back. The drive took 2 hours through beautiful countryside that Frank and I had traveled hundreds of times. When I arrived, everything looked exactly the same. The wooden dock Frank built, the rope swing he'd hung for Sarah when she was little, the fire pit where we'd roasted marshmallows and told ghost stories. I sat in Frank's favorite chair on the porch and could almost hear his laughter echoing across the water. I'm handling this the right way, I said out loud. Our daughter needs to learn respect. That evening, Mrs. Chen visited with fresh bread and neighborhood news. Margaret, I heard the strangest thing today. Betty from the grocery store said her cousin in California mentioned a young woman who looks just like Sarah working at a truck stop diner. Apparently, she's been telling people her mother died and left her nothing. My own daughter was telling strangers I was dead rather than admit she'd stolen from me. It hurt, but it also made me more determined to teach her the lesson she needed to learn. Mr. Williams called the next morning. Mrs. Stone, I have interesting news. Your daughter and her husband are being evicted from their rental house. It seems they can't make the payments. This was my moment. Mr. Williams, I want you to offer them a place to stay. Tell them there's a small apartment above a garage available for rent, but don't mention it belongs to me. He understood immediately. You want them to come to you without knowing it. Exactly. Sarah needed to learn humility before she could learn love. 3 days later, my phone rang. I almost didn't recognize Sarah's voice. It was small and scared, nothing like the confident tone she'd used when stealing my cabin. Mom, are you there? For a moment, I considered not answering, but Frank wouldn't have wanted that. Hello, Sarah. She started crying immediately. Mom, I'm so sorry. Everything went wrong here. Tom lost his job again and we're being evicted. We don't have anywhere to go. And I know I don't deserve your help after what I did, but... Her voice broke completely. Where are you now? I asked, keeping my voice calm. We're living in our truck in a parking lot. Tom keeps saying we should go to Las Vegas, but Mom, I just want to come home. I made the worst mistake of my life. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Sarah needed to feel the weight of what she'd done. There might be a small place you could rent here in town, I finally said. It's not much, but it's better than a truck. I gave her Mr. Williams' number and told her to call about the garage apartment. 2 weeks later, I watched from my kitchen window as a rusty truck pulled into the driveway next door, the driveway of the property I now owned. Sarah looked thin and tired as she climbed out. Her expensive clothes had been replaced with worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. Tom looked even worse, constantly checking over his shoulder like he was afraid someone might be following them. They had 2 garbage bags of belongings between them. Everything else was gone, sold or lost during their California adventure. Mrs. Chen knocked on my door that afternoon with a concerned expression. Margaret, did you see who moved in next door? It looks like your daughter, but she seems so different. I invited Mrs. Chen in for tea and told her the whole story. How Sarah had stolen from me, how she'd failed in California, and how she was now unknowingly renting from me. Mrs. Chen listened with wide eyes. You mean she doesn't know you own that apartment? I shook my head. She thinks some stranger is giving her a second chance. That evening, Sarah knocked on my door. When I opened it, I barely recognized my own daughter. She'd lost weight, her face was pale, and her eyes were red from crying. Mom, I know I don't deserve to ask, but could I borrow a cup of sugar? We don't have money for groceries until Tom finds work. I invited her in and made her a sandwich while she sat at my kitchen table and cried. Mom, I'm so sorry for what I did. I was selfish and stupid, and I hurt the one person who always loved me. Over the next few weeks, Sarah came to visit every few days. Each time, she looked a little better but also more humble. She'd help with my housework, cook dinner, and tell me about the job she was applying for. Mom, I never realized how hard it is to start over with nothing, she said one afternoon while washing my dishes. I understand now what I took from you. It wasn't just money. It was your security, your peace of mind, your trust. She was finally beginning to understand the real damage she'd caused. Tom, meanwhile, was struggling to find work. Every time someone ran a background check, his gambling debts and bad credit showed up. He'd come home angry and frustrated, blaming everyone except himself for their situation. Sarah began to see her husband differently. Mom, I think I married Tom because he told me what I wanted to hear, not because he was a good man. She was learning to see clearly for the first time in years. The hardship was teaching her lessons that comfort never could. One evening, Sarah arrived at my door with a small envelope. "Mom, I got a job at the grocery store. It doesn't pay much, but I wanted to give you this." Inside was $20. "It's not much, but I want to start paying back what I stole from you. Even if it takes me the rest of my life." I looked at that $20 bill and felt prouder than I had in months. Not because of the money, but because Sarah was finally taking responsibility for her actions without being forced to. Mr. Williams called that same week with an update. "Mrs. Stone, your daughter has been asking around town about part-time cleaning jobs to earn extra money. She's trying very hard to turn her life around." I asked him to keep watching quietly but not to interfere. Sarah needed to rebuild her character through her own effort, not through my secret help. The woman who had once stolen from her mother was now working 2 jobs to pay her back $20 at a time. 3 months after Sarah's return, I decided it was time for the truth. I called Mr. Williams and asked him to prepare all the papers: proof of my real wealth, documentation of the illegal cabin sale, and evidence of my ownership of the apartment where Sarah and Tom were living. "Mrs. Stone, are you sure you're ready for this conversation?" he asked. I looked out my window at Sarah's apartment, where I could see her studying job applications by lamplight. "She's ready," I said. "She's learned what she needed to learn." That Sunday, I invited Sarah for dinner and told her to come alone. She arrived with flowers from Mrs. Chen's garden and a homemade apple pie. "I used Grandma's recipe," she said shyly. "I hoped you'd remember how to make Dad's favorites." After dinner, I led her to the living room where I'd laid out all of Frank's papers on the coffee table. "Sarah, there's something I need to show you. Something your father wanted you to know, but only when you were ready to understand it." Sarah read the papers in silence, her face changing from confusion to amazement to horror as she realized what they meant. "Mom, this says you and Dad owned all sorts of property. That you're wealthy. That you've been wealthy all this time." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "The cabin I sold wasn't your only asset. It was just one small part of everything Dad built for our family." The weight of her crime was finally clear to her. She hadn't just stolen my vacation home. She'd stolen from a family fortune built over 40 years. "But Mom," Sarah whispered, "if you had all this money, why did you let me struggle these past months? Why didn't you help me when Tom and I were living in our truck?" This was the question I'd been waiting for. "Because you needed to learn something you couldn't learn any other way. You needed to learn the value of family, of honesty, of working for what you have." I showed her the deed to her apartment. "You've been paying rent to me for 3 months. Every dollar you've saved, every job you've worked, it's all been part of your real education." Sarah broke down completely then, not with self-pity but with genuine remorse. "I thought you were just a helpless old woman I could take advantage of. I never saw how strong you really are, how smart Dad was, how much you both sacrificed to build this life." She looked at me with new eyes. "You could have left me homeless in California. You could have had me arrested. Instead, you gave me a chance to prove I could change." I hugged my daughter for the first time since Frank's funeral, and this time it felt real. The next few weeks brought more revelations and decisions. Tom, when he learned the truth, became angry that I hadn't helped them sooner. He couldn't understand why someone would choose to teach rather than simply give. Sarah saw this difference clearly now and made the hard choice to ask him to leave. "I need to rebuild my life based on who I really am," she told him, "not on what I can get from other people." Tom packed his belongings and headed for Las Vegas, still chasing easy money instead of honest work. With Tom gone, Sarah and I began building a new relationship based on mutual respect instead of need or habit. She kept her job at the grocery store even though she no longer needed the money. "I want to earn my place in this family," she explained. "I want you to be proud of me because of who I am, not just because I'm your daughter." We started having dinner together every Sunday, sharing stories about Frank and making plans for the future that included both of us as partners, not as parent and child. 1 year later, our lives had changed in ways neither of us expected. Sarah had been promoted to assistant manager at the grocery store and was taking business classes at night. I had started a small scholarship fund in Frank's name for children from working families. We'd turned the cabin into a retreat where families could stay for free if they were going through hard times. "Dad would love this," Sarah said during one of our visits there. He always believed in helping people help themselves. Mrs. Chen visited one afternoon with fresh cookies and her usual neighborhood curiosity. "Margaret, I have to say, Sarah seems like a completely different person now. Whatever happened between you two, it worked." I smiled and poured tea for my old friend. "She learned that real wealth isn't what you have. It's who you become while earning it." Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. "And you learned that being a good mother sometimes means letting your children fall so they can learn to stand up strong." Sarah and I were sitting on the cabin porch that evening, watching the sun set over the lake where Frank used to fish. "Mom, I want you to know something. Even if you didn't have any money at all, even if you really were just surviving on Social Security, I would have learned the same lessons. What kept me going during the hardest times wasn't hope for financial rescue. It was knowing I had a mother who loved me enough to let me find my own way back to her." That night, I called Mr. Williams with a final request. "I want to change my will," I told him. "Sarah has proven she understands the value of what Frank and I built together. She's ready to be trusted with our legacy. But more than that, she'd proven she understood that true inheritance isn't money or property. It's the values and character that get passed down through generations." Frank would be proud of both of us, I thought. His secret plan had worked perfectly. The following spring brought new growth to my garden and new wisdom to our family. Sarah had started dating a teacher from her business class, a kind man who appreciated her work ethic and her devotion to family. "He reminds me of how Dad treated you," she told me one day while we were planting tomatoes together. "He sees who I really am, not what I can give him." I watched my daughter's face as she talked about her future, and I saw the same hope and determination that Frank had always admired in her. As we worked in the garden that Frank had started so many years ago, Sarah asked me a question that surprised me. "Mom, do you think you'll ever forgive me completely for what I did?" I stopped digging and looked at her seriously. "Sarah, I forgave you the day you gave me that first $20. Not because $20 meant anything, but because it meant you were taking responsibility for your actions." I smiled and touched her cheek. "The question isn't whether I forgive you. The question is whether you've forgiven yourself." Sarah thought about this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I think I have, Mom. Not because I've forgotten what I did, but because I've learned from it. I understand now that I hurt you not just by taking your property, but by treating you like you didn't matter." She looked around the garden where Frank's presence still felt so strong. "I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much you matter, not just to me, but to everyone whose life you touch." That evening, we had our first big family barbecue at the cabin since Frank's death. Sarah had invited her new boyfriend, and I'd invited Mrs. Chen and several other neighbors. As I watched everyone laughing and sharing stories around Frank's handmade picnic table, I felt his presence more strongly than I had since he died. "You did good, Frank," I whispered to the stars. "Our daughter learned what she needed to learn, and she learned it the right way." The next morning, Sarah found me sitting on the dock with my coffee, just like Frank used to do. "Mom, I want to ask you something important." She sat down beside me, her feet dangling in the cool lake water. "I want to help you manage all of Dad's investments and properties. Not because I need the money, but because I want to learn how to be a good steward of what he built." This was the moment I'd been hoping for. Sarah asking to be a partner, not just an heir. "Are you sure you're ready for that responsibility?" I asked her. "It means making decisions that affect other people's lives, the families who rent from us, the businesses that depend on our investments." Sarah nodded seriously. "I'm ready, Mom. I want to learn how to use money to help people just like you and Dad did. I want to understand why Dad kept his wealth secret and how you used that secret to teach me the most important lesson of my life." Over the following months, Sarah and I worked together to expand Frank's legacy in new ways. We created more scholarships, bought properties to rent affordably to young families, and established a program to help people who were struggling with debt, people like Sarah and Tom had been. I understand now why Dad didn't want me to know about the money when I was younger, Sarah said during one of our planning meetings. I wasn't mature enough to handle that kind of responsibility. 1 year after our big revelation, Sarah and I returned to the lawyer's office where she'd first learned the truth about Frank's wealth. Mr. Williams greeted us both with warm smiles. Mrs. Stone, Sarah, you've built something wonderful together this past year. He showed us reports on all our charitable activities and investments. Your husband would be amazed to see how his secret plan turned out. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. It turned out exactly as he hoped it would. That afternoon, we stopped by the grocery store where Sarah still worked, even though she no longer needed the job. Her co-workers had become like family to her, and she'd been promoted to manager. I'm not leaving, she told me when I suggested she could quit. These people depended on me when I had nothing. I'm not going to abandon them now that I have everything. This was the daughter Frank and I had always hoped she would become. Someone who understood that privilege came with responsibility. As we drove home that evening, Sarah asked me one more question. Mom, do you think Dad planned all of this? Do you think he knew I would make those mistakes and that you would handle them the way you did? I smiled as I thought about my husband's patient wisdom. I think your father knew that real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their choices. He trusted me to love you enough to let you learn, and he trusted you to be strong enough to change. That night, I found Sarah sitting in Frank's old chair on the cabin porch, reading one of his favorite books about investing. I want to understand everything he understood, she explained when she saw me watching. I want to be worthy of the trust you're both placing in me. I sat down beside her in my own chair, the same chairs where Frank and I had spent countless evenings planning our family's future. You already are worthy, I told her. You proved that the day you chose character over comfort. 2 years later, Sarah married her teacher in a small ceremony at the cabin. As I watched her exchange vows with a man who loved her for her kindness and strength rather than her inheritance, I felt Frank's presence so strongly it almost took my breath away. During the reception, Sarah pulled me aside for a private moment. Mom, I want you to know that everything I've learned about love, I learned from watching you and Dad. Thank you for loving me enough to let me find my own way home. At the end of that perfect day, as the last guests were leaving and Sarah and her new husband were cleaning up, I found myself alone on the dock where this whole journey had begun. Mrs. Chen joined me there, both of us watching the stars reflect on the calm water. Margaret, I've been thinking about your story, she said quietly. What you did for Sarah wasn't just about teaching her a lesson. It was about giving her a chance to become the person she was meant to be. That's exactly right, I replied. Frank always said that the best gift you can give someone isn't money or possessions. It's the opportunity to discover their own strength. We sat in comfortable silence, two old friends who had witnessed the power of patient love and hard-earned wisdom. In the distance, we could hear Sarah and her husband laughing as they put away the last of the wedding decorations. It was the sound of a family healed and made whole again. The next morning, Sarah stopped by to return the cabin key before leaving for her honeymoon. Mom, I want to ask you one last thing. If I ever have children, will you teach them the same way you taught me? I smiled and hugged my daughter, now truly a woman of character and substance. I'll teach them that real inheritance isn't what gets left to you, I said. It's what you build with your own hands and what you pass on through your own choices. As I watched Sarah drive away with her new husband, I felt complete peace for the first time since Frank's death. Our daughter had learned the most important lesson of all, that love sometimes looks like letting go, that character is built through struggle, and that the most valuable things in life can't be stolen or given away. They can only be earned through patience, humility, and the willingness to grow from our mistakes. That evening, Mrs. Chen brought over dinner and we ate together on my back porch, watching the garden Frank had planted bloom in full spring glory. Margaret, she said thoughtfully, what you and Frank created wasn't just wealth or property. You created a legacy of wisdom that will last for generations. I nodded, thinking about all the lives we'd been able to touch through Frank's careful planning and patient love. And the best part is, I added, Sarah will pass it on to her children, Not just the money but the values. 5 years have passed since that day when Sarah sold my cabin and thought she was leaving me with nothing. Our relationship now is stronger than it ever was when she was growing up. We're partners in managing Frank's legacy, friends who enjoy each other's company, and family members who understand that love is both gentle and strong. Sarah often says that the hardest year of her life was also the most important, because it taught her who she really was underneath all the selfish habits she developed. Last month, Sarah gave birth to her first child, a daughter she named Frances, after Frank. As I held my granddaughter for the first time, I whispered to her about her grandfather's wisdom and her mother's courage. "Little Frances," I said softly, "you're inheriting more than money or property. You're inheriting a family that believes in earning love through loyalty, building character through challenges, and making the world better through the choices we make every single day." Today, as I write this story, I'm sitting in Frank's chair at the cabin, watching Sarah teach little Frances how to feed the ducks at the water's edge. 3 generations of women, connected not just by blood but by the lessons we've learned about forgiveness, growth, and the patience required for real love. I can feel Frank's approval in the warm sunshine and gentle breeze. His plan worked better than even he could have imagined. Our daughter learned not just to value what she had, but to understand how to build something worth keeping. The cabin Frank built with his own hands now serves families throughout our community who need a peaceful place to heal from their own difficulties. The scholarships we've established have helped dozens of young people get education they couldn't afford. The affordable housing we provide has given families stability they wouldn't have otherwise. But the most important thing Frank left us wasn't money or property. It was the understanding that true wealth comes from lifting others up, and that the best inheritance is wisdom passed down through love that is both patient and true. Every Sunday now, 3 generations gather around Frank's handmade table for dinner and stories. Sarah tells her daughter about the grandfather she never met but whose presence fills every corner of our lives. I tell them both about the importance of making choices based on character rather than convenience. And little Frances listens with the wide eyes of someone who will grow up understanding that families are held together not by what they own, but by how much they care for each other's growth and well-being. Sometimes people ask me if I was too harsh with Sarah, if I should have just given her money when she was struggling instead of letting her work so hard to rebuild her life. But I know that the woman my daughter became through facing consequences is far stronger and wiser than the woman she would have been if I'd simply rescued her from her mistakes. Frank always said that the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is help them become capable of standing on their own. That's exactly what we did. Mr. Williams still handles our legal affairs, and he often comments on how Sarah has grown into her role as a responsible steward of Frank's legacy. "She asks better questions now," he told me recently. "She thinks about how every decision will affect the families who depend on your properties and programs." This is the daughter Frank and I always knew she could become. Someone who uses resources to build others up rather than just to make her own life easier. The grocery store where Sarah works has become a community hub under her management. She's created a program where families can earn store credit by volunteering in the community, and she's established a small food bank in the back room for neighbors going through temporary hard times. "I learned what it feels like to worry about your next meal," she explains to people who ask why she does so much for others. "I never want anyone else to feel that scared and alone." Last week, Sarah received a letter from Tom, her ex-husband, who's now in jail in Nevada for fraud. He'd apparently been running the same scheme on other people that he'd tried with us, forging signatures, taking money under false pretenses, disappearing when things got difficult. "I'm glad you learned to see through him when you did," I told Sarah as she showed me the letter. "Imagine if you'd still been married to him when he got arrested." She shuddered at the thought of how much worse her situation could have been. The beach cabin has become Sarah's favorite place to bring little Frances for weekend visits. I watch my daughter teach her own child the same lessons about nature, family, and respect that Frank once taught her. "This is where your grandfather proposed to your grandmother," Sarah tells Frances as they sit on the dock. "And this is where your grandmother taught your mother that real love sometimes means letting people learn from their own mistakes." The cycle of wisdom continues, passed down through generations of patient teaching. Mrs. Chen, now in her 80s, still visits regularly and has become like a grandmother to little Francis. Margaret, she said to me last month, watching your family heal has been one of the great privileges of my long life. You proved that it's never too late for people to change if they're loved properly. He paused thoughtfully. And you proved that loving someone properly sometimes means being stronger than they are until they can find their own strength. On quiet evenings, I still sit in Frank's chair and talk to him about our daughter and granddaughter. I tell him how Sarah has grown into a woman who understands that privilege comes with responsibility, that wealth is meant to be shared, and that the most important things can't be bought or sold. You would be so proud of her, I whisper to the stars. She learned every lesson you hoped she would, and she learned them well. Sarah often brings her business class textbooks to our Sunday dinners, studying late into the evening at Frank's old desk. She's working toward a degree in nonprofit management, determined to turn our charitable activities into something that can help even more families. I want to build something lasting, she explains when I suggest she doesn't need to work so hard. I want Dad's legacy to keep growing long after we're gone. This is the long-term thinking Frank always hoped she would develop. The apartment building Frank bought decades ago has a waiting list now of young families who want to live in housing they can actually afford. Sarah personally interviews every potential tenant, not to judge their worthiness but to understand their dreams and challenges. I remember what it felt like to have nowhere to go, she tells me. I want to make sure every family feels welcome and supported here. She's created a community garden behind the building and organized monthly gatherings for all the tenants. Sometimes I think about that phone call that started this whole journey. Sarah's cold voice telling me she'd sold my cabin and taken the money. If someone had told me then that this betrayal would ultimately bring us closer together than we'd ever been, I wouldn't have believed them. But Frank always said that some of life's best gifts come wrapped in what looks like disaster. Our disaster became our greatest blessing because we both learned to handle it with wisdom instead of anger. Little Francis is walking now, tottering around the cabin on chubby legs while Sarah and I cook Sunday dinner together. Mom, Sarah said to me last week, I want Francis to grow up knowing her family's story. Not just the happy parts, but the parts about making mistakes and learning from them too. I agreed completely. Truth-telling, even when it's painful, is what keeps families strong across generations. Secrets and pride are what tear families apart. The scholarship fund we established in Frank's name has now helped over 100 students attend college. Each year, Sarah and I attend a dinner where the scholarship recipients share their stories and future plans. Many of them come from families like we used to pretend to be, working people who save every penny but still struggle to afford education for their children. Dad would love knowing his secret savings are giving other families the opportunities he wanted for us, Sarah always says at these events. Mr. Williams is retiring next year, and Sarah has been learning to handle more of our legal and financial affairs herself. Your daughter has excellent judgment, he told me recently. She thinks like your husband did, carefully, patiently, always considering the long-term effects of every decision. This is perhaps the greatest compliment anyone could give Sarah, comparing her wisdom to Frank's. She's earned that comparison through years of careful choices and responsible actions. On the 5th anniversary of Frank's death, Sarah and I decided to plant a memorial garden behind the cabin. As we worked together in the soil, our hands dirty and our backs aching, Sarah said something that took my breath away. Mom, I'm grateful for everything that happened, even the painful parts. If I hadn't lost everything and had to rebuild my character from scratch, I never would have become someone worthy of Dad's legacy. She paused in her digging. I never would have become someone worthy of your trust. The town newspaper ran a story about our family's charitable activities last month, calling us an example of quiet generosity. Sarah laughed when she read it. If they only knew the whole story, she said. If they knew that 5 years ago, I was living in a truck because I'd stolen from my own mother and lost everything to a gambling addict. But that's exactly why our story matters. Because it proves that people can change, that families can heal, and that love really can conquer the worst mistakes if it's patient enough and strong enough. Little Frances babbled her first word last month. Mama, and Sarah cried with joy. I want to be the kind of mother to her that you were to me. she told me through her tears. The kind who loves enough to let her child learn from consequences, who's strong enough to be patient while character develops. I hugged my daughter and my granddaughter together. 3 generations of women bound by love that has been tested by fire and proven true. As I finish writing this story, I'm sitting in my kitchen where this whole journey began, looking out the window at the garden Frank planted and Sarah tends. The tomatoes are ripe, the flowers are blooming, and life continues its cycle of growth and renewal. Frank's secret box changed all our lives, but not in the way anyone might have expected. It didn't just reveal hidden wealth. It revealed hidden strength in both Sarah and me. The phone that once carried Sarah's cruel words now brings me daily calls from a daughter who asks about my health, shares her hopes for Francis, and includes me in every important decision. Love really does have the power to transform people, but only if it's wise enough to let transformation happen naturally rather than forcing it or preventing it. Frank knew this. He trusted me to know it too. And somehow, despite all our mistakes and struggles, we got it right. Today, Sarah brought Francis over for our usual Sunday visit, but she also brought something special. A small wooden box that her husband had made in his workshop. "For you, Mom," she said, handing it to me with a smile. "I want you to fill it with letters for Francis, the way Dad filled that box with papers for us. When she's old enough to need wisdom, she'll have your words to guide her." I opened the beautiful box and imagined filling it with all the lessons Frank and I learned together about patience, forgiveness, and the strength that comes from loving people enough to let them grow. The circle continues as it should. Frank's wisdom, tested and proven through our family's crisis, will now be passed down to another generation. Little Frances will grow up knowing she's loved, but also knowing that love sometimes looks like letting people face their own challenges. She'll understand that character is built through choices, not circumstances, and that the most valuable inheritance isn't money but the wisdom to use whatever you have in ways that make the world better. As the sun sets behind the trees Frank planted decades ago, I look at my daughter and granddaughter playing together on the floor where Frank used to read his evening newspaper. Sarah has become everything he hoped she would be, not despite the crisis that almost destroyed our family, but because of how we all chose to handle it. Love won as Frank always believed it would. But it won by being patient, strong, and wise rather than by being easy, quick, or comfortable. Tomorrow, Sarah will go back to her job at the grocery store, continue her college classes, and tend to the dozens of families whose lives are better because of the program she's created. I'll tend my garden, answer letters from scholarship recipients, and prepare for another week of the quiet fulfillment that comes from seeing Frank's legacy continue to grow in ways he never could have imagined. Our story proves that it's never too late for families to heal, for people to change, and for love to find a way to make everything better than it was before. The beach house sale that started this whole journey turned out to be exactly what our family needed. Not the money Sarah thought she was taking, but the crisis that revealed who we really were underneath all our assumptions and comfortable habits. Frank's hidden wealth wasn't just financial. It was the wisdom to know that real security comes from strong character, loving relationships, and the ability to face whatever life brings with courage and grace. These are the treasures that can never be stolen, never be lost, and never lose their value no matter how much time passes. As I close this story and prepare for bed, I whisper one last thank you to Frank for trusting me with our daughter's education and for believing that love really is stronger than selfishness, patience really is more powerful than anger, and forgiveness really can transform even the most broken relationships into something beautiful. Sarah learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing each other every day and earning the love we're given through the choices we make and the character we build. Our story isn't unique. Families everywhere struggle with disappointment, betrayal, and the challenge of loving difficult people through difficult times. But our story does prove that healing is possible when people are willing to do the hard work of growing up, taking responsibility, and choosing character over comfort. Frank's greatest gift wasn't the money he saved. It was the wisdom he shared about how to love people properly, which sometimes means being strong enough to let them learn from their own mistakes. The little girl who once played on this same floor where her mother and daughter now play together will grow up understanding that she comes from a family that believes in second chances, earned forgiveness, and the power of patient love to overcome even the worst betrayals. She'll know that her grandfather was wise, her grandmother was strong, And her mother learned to choose family over selfishness because someone loved her enough to teach her the difference. Tonight, as every night, I'll say a prayer of gratitude for Frank's wisdom, Sarah's transformation, and little Frances's bright future. I'll thank God for the crisis that almost broke us but instead made us stronger than we'd ever been before. And I'll go to sleep knowing that love really does win in the end. Not the easy kind of love that gives people what they want, but the hard kind of love that helps people become who they're meant to be. The phone call that began with Sarah's betrayal has been replaced by hundreds of calls filled with respect, gratitude, and genuine affection. The daughter who once saw me as an obstacle has become a woman who sees me as a partner and friend. The cabin that was sold in selfishness has become a place where families find healing and hope. Frank's secret plan worked better than even he could have imagined, because love guided every step of the journey from beginning to end. As I finish these reflections and prepare to add them to the box Sarah gave me for Frances, I'm filled with peace about our family's future. The lessons Frank taught us about patience, the lessons Sarah learned about character, and the lessons I learned about the strength that comes from loving people properly will all be passed down to another generation. The cycle of wisdom continues, and our family's story of redemption becomes part of the legacy we leave behind. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities to live out the values Frank instilled in our family. Sarah will continue building programs to help other families avoid the mistakes she made. I'll continue managing the wealth Frank accumulated so carefully, using it to create opportunities for people who need second chances. And little Frances will continue growing up in a family that believes deeply in the power of love, forgiveness, and the strength that comes from facing difficult truths with courage and grace. The beach house that was sold in betrayal has become a symbol of restoration and hope. The phone call that broke my heart became the beginning of the most important conversation my daughter and I ever had about what really matters in life. The crisis that could have destroyed our family became the foundation for a relationship stronger than anything we'd had before. This is the mystery and miracle of patient love. It can turn even the worst circumstances into opportunities for growth and redemption. Years from now, when Frances is old enough to understand our family story, I'll tell her that her mother made mistakes but learned from them, that her grandfather was wise enough to plan for both prosperity and problems, and that her grandmother learned that the strongest love is sometimes the kind that steps back and lets people find their own way home. These are the lessons that money can't buy but that make life truly rich in all the ways that matter most. The secret Frank kept wasn't just about money. It was about the wisdom to know when to help, when to step back, and when to trust that love will find a way to heal whatever has been broken. His plan required faith in both Sarah's ability to learn and my ability to teach her without destroying our relationship in the process. That faith was justified by the outcome, but it took courage and patience neither of us knew we possessed until we were tested by circumstances beyond our control. As I look around this house where Frank and I built our life together, where Sarah grew up and is now raising her own daughter, I see evidence everywhere of the quiet miracles that happen when families choose to love each other through difficulties rather than abandoning each other because of them. The furniture Frank built, the garden he planted, the traditions we maintained, and the values we lived by all contributed to creating the foundation that made Sarah's redemption possible. The woman who once told me she'd sold my house and hung up without caring about my feelings now calls me every morning to check on my health and every evening to share the details of her day. This transformation didn't happen overnight or easily. It took months of consistent choices, honest conversations, and the patient rebuilding of trust that had been shattered. But it did happen, proving that relationships really can be healed when both people are willing to do the hard work of growth and forgiveness. Frank's legacy lives on not just in the financial security he provided, but in the wisdom he shared about how to love difficult people through difficult times. Sarah's transformation lives on not just in her own changed life, but in the example she sets for Frances about taking responsibility for mistakes and choosing character over convenience. My own growth lives on in the knowledge that strength sometimes looks like stepping back and letting people learn from their own consequences rather than rushing to rescue them from difficulty. The phone that once carried words of betrayal now carries words of love, gratitude, and respect. The relationship that was once based on need and habit is now based on mutual choice and genuine affection. The family that was once divided by selfishness and misunderstanding is now united by shared values and common purpose. These changes didn't happen by accident. They happened because people made deliberate choices to grow, forgive, and love each other better than they had before. As the years pass and Frances grows from a baby into a child who will face her own challenges and choices, she'll do so knowing that she comes from a family that believes in redemption, second chances, and the power of patient love to overcome even the worst betrayals. She'll know that her mother learned to choose family over selfishness, her grandmother learned to choose strength over bitterness, and her grandfather's wisdom guided the whole family through the darkness and back into the light. The story that began with Sarah's cruel phone call ends with a family reunited, wisdom passed down through generations, and love proven stronger than betrayal, disappointment, or despair. Frank's secret plan worked perfectly. Not because it was easy, but because it was rooted in truth about what people need to grow and what families need to heal. The wealth he accumulated was important, but the wisdom he shared about how to use that wealth for healing rather than harm was what really saved our family. Today, as every day, I'm grateful for the crisis that almost destroyed us because it led to the healing that made us stronger than we'd ever been before. I'm grateful for Frank's patient planning, Sarah's willingness to learn from her mistakes, and the opportunity to show that love really can conquer all things when it's wise enough, patient enough, and strong enough to let people face the consequences of their choices while still providing a path back home. The beach house stands restored, the family stands reunited, and the legacy continues through another generation of people who understand that true wealth isn't what you accumulate but what you build in terms of character, relationships, and positive impact on the world around you. Frank's secret wasn't just about money. It was about the wisdom to know that the best inheritance you can leave your children is the knowledge of how to love and be loved in ways that make everyone stronger and better. As I close this chapter of our family's story, I do so knowing that the lessons learned through our crisis will echo through generations of descendants who will face their own challenges and choices. They'll do so armed with the knowledge that families can survive betrayal, people can change, and love really does have the power to redeem even the worst situations when it's applied with wisdom, patience, and unwavering faith in people's ability to grow beyond their mistakes. The little wooden box Sarah gave me is filling up with letters for Frances about courage, forgiveness, the importance of earning trust, and the joy that comes from using whatever resources you have to make other people's lives better. These letters will be her inheritance someday, along with whatever financial resources remain and the ongoing programs we've established to help other families. But the letters matter most because they contain the wisdom that makes all the rest worthwhile. Frank would be amazed to see how his careful planning and patient love transformed not just our family but dozens of other families who have been touched by the programs Sarah created and manages. His secret box of papers became the foundation for a legacy that reaches far beyond our own lives and into the lives of people we may never meet but whose opportunities were created by his wisdom and our family's commitment to using resources responsibly and compassionately. The story that began with betrayal ends with redemption. The relationship that was broken by selfishness has been healed by sacrifice. The family that was divided by misunderstanding is now united by love that has been tested and proven true. Frank's plan worked, Sarah's heart changed, and our family's future is brighter than it ever could have been without the crisis that seemed like disaster but became the doorway to our greatest blessings. As night falls over the garden Frank planted and Sarah tends, over the house where 3 generations now gather in love and respect, over the community where our family's story has become a quiet testimony to the power of patient love, I whisper one final thank you to my beloved husband for trusting me with our daughter's education and for believing that healing was possible even when everything seemed hopeless. His faith was justified, his plan succeeded, and his legacy lives on in ways more beautiful than he ever imagined. The phone call that shattered my heart became the beginning of the most important healing our family ever experienced. The daughter who abandoned me became the woman who now calls me her dearest friend. The crisis that could have destroyed us became the foundation for strength neither of us knew we possessed. This is the miracle of patient love. It can turn even the worst betrayals into opportunities for growth, forgiveness, and redemption that make families stronger than they ever were before. Tomorrow Sarah will continue her work helping other families avoid the mistakes she made. I'll continue managing Frank's legacy to create opportunities for people who need second chances. Frances will continue growing up in a family that believes deeply in forgiveness, responsibility, and the power of love to overcome any obstacle. And somewhere, Frank is smiling at how perfectly his plan worked. Not because it was easy, but because it was rooted in wisdom about what people and families really need to heal and grow. The secret Frank kept wasn't just about financial security. It was about the deeper security that comes from knowing your family is strong enough to survive any crisis and loving enough to help each member become their best possible self. That security can't be stolen, can't be lost, and can't lose value no matter what happens in the world around us. It's the most precious inheritance any family can pass down through generations. As I prepare for bed in the house where Frank and I lived, loved, and raised our daughter, I'm filled with gratitude for every difficult moment that led to this peace. The betrayal taught us both about the value of trust. The crisis taught us both about the importance of character. The separation taught us both about the preciousness of family. The reunion taught us both about the power of forgiveness. Every painful step was necessary for the healing that followed. The beach house that was sold in selfishness has become a place where other families find restoration. The wealth that was stolen in betrayal has become the foundation for programs that help people rebuild their lives. The relationship that was broken by pride has become stronger through humility. The family that was divided by misunderstanding is now united by wisdom earned through experience. Frank's plan succeeded beyond his wildest dreams because it was built on love that never gives up. Little Frances will grow up knowing that she comes from a family that believes in redemption, values character over comfort, and understands that the strongest love is sometimes the kind that lets people learn from their own mistakes. She'll know that her grandfather was wise, her mother learned from her errors, and her grandmother chose forgiveness over bitterness. These lessons will guide her through whatever challenges she faces in her own life. The story that began with a phone call announcing betrayal ends with a family reunited in love, respect, and genuine affection. Sarah learned that privilege comes with responsibility. I learned that strength sometimes means stepping back and letting people face consequences. Frank's wisdom guided us both through the darkness and back into the light. Our family's crisis became our greatest blessing because we chose to handle it with patience, faith, and unwavering commitment to each other's growth. As I close this story and add it to the growing collection of letters for Frances, I do so knowing that our family's journey from betrayal to redemption will inspire her when she faces her own difficult choices. She'll know that people can change, families can heal, and love really does conquer all when it's applied with wisdom, patience, and faith in people's ability to grow beyond their mistakes and become better than they ever thought possible. The phone calls that now fill my days with joy began with a call that broke my heart. The daughter who now respects me as a friend once treated me like an obstacle. The family that now gathers in love once was divided by selfishness. These transformations didn't happen by accident. They happened because people made choices to grow, forgive, and love better than they had before. Frank's plan provided the framework, but our choices made the healing possible. Tonight, as every night since our family healed, I'll fall asleep grateful for the crisis that almost broke us because it led to the redemption that made us stronger than we'd ever been. I'll dream of Frank's proud smile as he watches his plan unfold perfectly, Sarah's courage as she rebuilt her character from the ground up, and Frances's bright future as a child who grows up understanding what real love looks like when it's tested by fire and proven true. The wooden box Sarah made for my letters to Frances sits on my nightstand, slowly filling with the wisdom our family learned through crisis and healing. Someday, when Frances is old enough to understand, these letters will teach her about courage, forgiveness, the importance of earning trust, and the joy that comes from using whatever resources you have to lift other people up. But the greatest lesson will be that families can survive anything when love is patient enough and strong enough to guide them home. The beach house stands as a testament to restoration. The family stands as a testament to redemption. The legacy continues as a testament to the power of patient love to overcome betrayal, disappointment, and despair. Frank's secret wasn't just about money. It was about the wisdom to know that true security comes from strong character, loving relationships, and the ability to face whatever life brings with courage, grace, and unwavering faith in the possibility of healing and growth. As I turn off the lamp and settle into the bed I shared with Frank for so many years, I whisper one last prayer of gratitude for the journey that brought our family from the brink of destruction to this place of peace and love. Tomorrow will bring new opportunities to live out the lessons we learned, new chances to help other families facing their own crises, and new moments to appreciate the precious gift of second chances and earned forgiveness. The story that began with Sarah's cold announcement that she'd sold my house ends with a family united by love that has been tested and proven true. The secret Frank kept led to wisdom our whole family needed to learn. The crisis that seemed like disaster became the doorway to our greatest blessings. Love won in the end. Not the easy kind that avoids difficulty, but the hard kind that faces challenges with patience, wisdom, and unshakable faith in people's ability to grow. Sweet dreams will come easily tonight, filled with images of Frank's satisfied smile, Sarah's transformed heart, and Frances's bright future as a child who grows up knowing she's loved by people who understand what love really means. Our family's story proves that redemption is possible, healing is real, and love truly does conquer all when it's wise enough, patient enough, and strong enough to help people become their very best selves through whatever trials they must face. The phone that once carried words of betrayal now carries words of love. The daughter who once abandoned me now chooses me every day. The family that was once broken is now whole. Frank's secret plan worked perfectly because it was rooted in truth about what people need to grow and what families need to heal. His legacy lives on in every life touched by the wisdom he shared and the love he made possible through his patient, careful planning for both our prosperity and our problems. As sleep comes to this house where 3 generations now gather in love and respect, I'm filled with peace about our family's future and gratitude for our family's past. The lessons learned through our crisis will echo through generations of descendants who will face their own challenges armed with the knowledge that families can survive anything when love is patient enough, wise enough, and strong enough to guide them through the darkness and back into the light where healing waits for those brave enough to choose growth over comfort. The beach house that symbolizes our family's restoration stands ready for another generation of children to learn about love, forgiveness, and the importance of family loyalty. The programs we established will continue helping other families long after we're gone. The wisdom we gained through our crisis will live on in the letters I'm writing for Frances, and in the example Sarah sets as a mother who understands that love sometimes means being strong enough to let people face their own consequences while never abandoning them in their struggles. Tomorrow the sun will rise on a family made whole by patience, wisdom, and love that refused to give up even in the darkest moments. Sarah will continue her work helping others avoid the mistakes she made. I'll continue managing Frank's legacy to create opportunities for people who need second chances. Frances will continue growing up secure in the knowledge that she's loved by people who understand what love really means, and who will guide her with the same patient wisdom that saved our family when everything seemed hopeless. The secret Frank kept led to the salvation of our family. The crisis that almost destroyed us became the foundation for strength we never knew we possessed. The betrayal that broke my heart became the beginning of the most honest relationship my daughter and I ever had. The phone call that announced disaster became the first note in a symphony of healing that continues to this day, and will echo through generations yet to be born into our family's legacy of love that never gives up. As I drift toward sleep in the peace that comes from knowing our family is whole again, I whisper one final word of thanks to Frank for trusting me with Sarah's education, to Sarah for having the courage to change, and to God for providing the strength we needed to love each other through the crisis and into the light of redemption. Our story proves that it's never too late for healing, never too late for growth, and never too late for love to find a way to make everything better than it was before. The wooden box of letters for Frances represents hope for the future, a future where the wisdom our family gained through struggle will guide another generation through whatever challenges await them. The beach house represents restoration of what was lost. The programs we've established represent our commitment to helping others find their way home. And the love that binds our family together represents the miracle that happens when people choose to grow through their difficulties rather than being destroyed by them.